I found out my parents had used my credit to buy a $40,000 car on a Tuesday morning that felt completely ordinary until it wasn't. I was standing barefoot in my kitchen, still half asleep, holding a mug of coffee that smelled stronger than usual. Side traffic hummed. My phone buzzed once on the counter. I almost ignored it. Then it buzzed again. A notification from my bank. The subject line read, "Important update regarding your credit activity." My first thought was fraud. A stolen card. A data breach. Something impersonal. Something that happened to strangers. I opened the app anyway, more annoyed than worried, expecting to click report issue and move on with my day. Instead, my stomach dropped so fast it felt like my body lagged behind my mind. There it was. A brand new auto loan. $40,000. Proved. Div. My name printed cleanly at the top of the screen. My social security number attached to a debt I had never agreed to. I stared at the numbers like they might rearrange themselves if I waited long enough. They didn't. The room felt suddenly too quiet. My hands started to shake. Not violently. Just enough that the coffee rippled inside the mug. I checked the lender again. Then again. A dealership 2 towns over. The same one my parents had mentioned casually a few weeks earlier. The same conversation I'd brushed off without a second thought. "We're just looking," my dad had said, leaning back in his chair like it was nothing. "Just test driving," my mom added. "At our age, we deserve something reliable," she joked. I remembered laughing. I remembered saying, "You've earned it." I had no idea they meant with my credit. I sank into the kitchen chair as if my legs had given up without asking permission. $40,000. More money than I had ever seen at once. More money than I could afford to lose. Another notification popped up. Credit utilization spike. Poor drop. My heart started pounding harder now. This wasn't theoretical. This was happening in real time. I did the math automatically. Monthly payments. Interest. Insurance. Late fees if something went wrong. What it would mean for my future. For renting. For buying my own car one day. Forever owning a home. All of it suddenly fragile. All of it suddenly tied to a decision I never made. I grabbed my phone and called my mom first. Straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. I called my dad. It rang longer. Too long. Then he picked up. "Hey kiddo," he said, cheerful like this was any other morning. "Did you buy a car?" I asked, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. There was a pause. Not confusion. Not surprise. Recognition. "Well," he said slowly, "we needed one." The words hit me in the chest. "Why?" I asked carefully. "Is it in my name?" Another pause. Longer. "We were going to explain," he said. "Can you not freak out?" That sentence did something to me. 'Cause people only ask you not to freak out when they already know they crossed a line. "I'm looking at my credit report," I said. "I think I'm allowed to react." He sighed. The familiar sigh I'd grown up with. The one that meant I was being inconvenient. "The dealership said it would be easier this way," he said. "Your credit is better than ours. We were just trying to save on interest. Save on interest. By using my identity. Without asking." "You didn't think to mention this to me first?" I asked. "We knew you'd say no," he replied. The honesty of that answer knocked the air out of me. "So you did it anyway," I said. "For the family," he answered quickly. There it was. The phrase they always used when they wanted access to something that wasn't theirs. "My credit isn't a family resource," I said. "We'll make the payments," he insisted. "You're being dramatic." My hands clenched into fists so tight my nails bit into my palms. "I didn't agree to this," I said. "It's temporary," he replied. Everything is temporary until it ruins someone's life, I said quietly. He sounded irritated now. Why are you making this about you? That question stunned me into silence. Because somehow my parents had taken out a $40,000 loan in my name. And I was the problem for noticing. I hung up the phone with my dad and sat there staring at the wall like it might start explaining things to me. My heart was still racing, but underneath the panic, something heavier settled in. Recognition. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a choice. Calculated one. And I was only now being looped in because the paperwork was already done. My phone rang again. Mom this time. I answered before it could go to voicemail. Why are you calling me now? I asked. She didn't start with an apology. She never did. She started with reassurance. Sweetheart, you're blowing this out of proportion, she said softly. That tone, the one she used when she wanted to sound calm while dismissing everything I was feeling. There's $40,000 in my name, I said. That's not a proportion. That's a fact. She sighed. A smaller sigh than Dad's. More wounded. We didn't have another option, she said. I almost laughed. You had options, I replied. You just didn't like them. She ignored that. The dealership wouldn't approve us on our own, she continued. Our credit isn't what it used to be. Interest rates are insane. This was the only way to get something reliable. So you decided to use mine, I said. For now, she corrected. For now, I repeated. The words tasted bitter. Why didn't you ask me? There it was. Question that mattered. She hesitated, then said the quiet part out loud. Because you would have made it difficult. Difficult. Not wrong. Not illegal. Not unethical. Just inconvenient. You mean I would have said no, I replied. Well, she said defensively, you don't understand what it's like at our age. We needed this car. My chest tightened. You needed it, I said. I didn't agree to finance it. She clicked her tongue. Don't make it sound like that. How should I make it sound? I asked. That my parents took out a loan in my name without consent? Silence. Then irritation. You always make things sound so harsh, she said. Harsh. Like I was being rude by naming reality. We raised you, she added. And now you're acting like we betrayed you. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Something colder. Clarity. You didn't betray me emotionally, I said. You committed fraud. Her breath caught. That's an ugly word, she snapped. So is debt, I replied. She lowered her voice. Listen, she said. Your father and I would never hurt you intentionally. But you did it anyway, I said. That's the part you keep skipping. She tried another angle. We're family, she said. Families help each other. Families ask, I replied. Families don't take. She laughed nervously. You're being dramatic again. There it was. The label. The one that erased accountability every time. I need to know exactly what you signed, I said. We handled it, she replied quickly. You don't need to worry about the details. I absolutely do, I said. It's my credit. My future. My name. She grew sharp now. You always think you know better, she said. Maybe if you trusted us more. I trusted you, I interrupted. That's how this happened. That stopped her. For a moment. Then she went quiet. Not reflective. Strategic. Your father's stressed, she said. This is bad timing. Can we not fight about this right now? Bad timing. Like identity theft had a calendar. I'm not fighting, I said. I'm asking how you plan to fix this. She hesitated. then said the sentence that changed everything. "Well, you make more money than we do." I closed my eyes. There it was. The real logic. Not need. Not necessity. Entitlement. "You can handle it," she continued. "We'll help when we can." "When you can," I repeated. "Yes," she said. "Don't be selfish." Selfish. For not wanting my financial future hijacked. "I didn't agree to be your safety net," I said quietly. "We're not strangers," she snapped. "No," I replied. "You're worse," she gasped. "How dare you?" "How dare I notice?" I asked. The line went quiet. Then she said coldly, "We'll talk later when you calm down." And she hung up. I sat there, phone still pressed to my ear, listening to nothing. That was the moment it fully sank in. They didn't think they had done anything wrong. They thought I was the problem for reacting. And for the first time, I understood something terrifying. If I didn't act now, they would do this again. After the call ended, I sat there longer than I want to admit, staring at my reflection in the dark screen of my phone. I looked calm. Too calm. Kind of calm that shows up right before something breaks permanently. My first instinct was to minimize it. To tell myself I was overreacting. That they would fix it. That parents wouldn't really ruin their own child's future. But then I opened the credit app again. And the numbers were still there. $40,000. Div. Mine. I felt the weight of it settle into my chest like wet cement. This wasn't emotional anymore. This was legal. Financial. Permanent if I let it be. I did what I always did when I was scared. I researched. I opened article after article about identity misuse, unauthorized loans, family fraud. Story after story sounded uncomfortably familiar. Adult children. Parents. Good intentions. Destroyed credit. Years of recovery. Comments were brutal. "Why didn't you stop them sooner?" "Family or not, that's fraud." "Never co-sign unless you're ready to pay." I hadn't co-signed anything. That was the part that made my hands shake again. I didn't even exist in the room when the paperwork was signed. I called the dealership next. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. I gave my name. They pulled up the file instantly. "Yes," the salesman said cheerfully. "Your parents were thrilled. Beautiful car." "My parents," I repeated. "Yes," he said. "They said you couldn't be there but gave verbal authorization." My stomach turned. "I never gave authorization," I said. There was a pause. A long one. "Well," he said carefully, "they had your information." "That's not consent," I replied. "I need copies of everything you have." Another pause. Then defensiveness. "You'll have to talk to your parents about that." "I am talking to you," I said. "And I'm documenting this call." That changed his tone. Suddenly, he was cautious. Suddenly, he needed to check with his manager. I hung up and stared at the wall again. This wasn't just betrayal. It was entitlement dressed up as family loyalty. My phone buzzed. Text from Dad. "Why did you call the dealership?" I laughed once. A sharp sound that surprised even me. "You used my identity," I typed back. "I'm allowed to ask questions." "You're making things worse," he replied. Worse. Like the damage wasn't already done. "I'm protecting myself," I wrote. "Stop being dramatic," he answered. That word again. Like a hammer. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a new tab. Legal aid. Consumer protection. Taps to freeze credit. I placed a fraud alert on all 3 bureaus. My hands moved quickly now. Purposefully. Each click felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. An hour later, my mom called again. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. Her voice was tight. "You're scaring your father. We didn't raise you to be like this. Like this. Like someone who noticed. Like someone who said no." I listened to the message twice, then deleted it. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel guilty for not responding. I felt resolved. 'Cause something had shifted. I wasn't arguing anymore. I was preparing. That night, sleep didn't come easily. But not because of panic. 'Cause of focus. I lay in bed mapping out outcomes. Best case. Worst case. And the one I was finally willing to choose. This ended with lawyers. With police reports. With permanent distance. So be it. They had crossed a line they couldn't uncross. And for the first time, I wasn't willing to step back behind it. I stared at the ceiling and whispered the truth I'd been avoiding. If I let this go, it would never stop. And I was done being the safety net they kept falling through. The next morning, I woke up with a headache that felt like it had been building for years. Not from lack of sleep. From clarity. Kind that rearranges everything once it finally arrives. I checked my phone before getting out of bed. 3 missed calls from Mom. 2 from Dad. A text from Ethan that read, "Can we not blow this up?" Blow this up. Like I was the one who had lit the fuse. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I made coffee, sat at the small kitchen table, and opened my laptop again. I pulled my full credit report. Every account. Every inquiry. Every detail. Seeing it all laid out felt like reading a medical chart after an accident. Detached. Clinical. Terrifying. The auto loan was listed clearly. Balance. Interest rate. Term. 72 months. 6 years. 6 years of my life tied to a car I had never seen. My hands clenched around the mug. I thought about all the things I had planned. Moving to a better apartment. Saving for my own car. Maybe one day owning something instead of renting it. Every plan suddenly felt conditional. Dependent on whether my parents decided to keep paying on time. I called the credit bureau next. I explained the situation slowly, carefully. The woman on the line listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "I'm sorry this happened to you." 4 simple words. The more validation than I'd received from my own family. She walked me through the process. Dispute forms. Fraud affidavit. Police report. Each step felt heavier than the last. 'Cause every step forward legally meant another step away from my parents emotionally. After I hung up, my phone rang again. "Dad." I answered this time. "What are you doing?" he demanded, skipping any greeting. "I'm fixing what you broke," I replied. "You're going to ruin us," he snapped. That sentence settled something inside me. Not panic. Not guilt. Confirmation. They weren't afraid of what they'd done. They were afraid of consequences. "I didn't create this situation," I said. "You did." Mom grabbed the phone. Her voice was sharp now. "How could you even think about filing fraud paperwork against your own parents? How could you use my identity without permission?" I shot back. "We're family," she insisted. "And I'm your daughter," I replied. "That should have mattered before you signed my name." She started crying. Real tears this time. Or at least they sounded real. "Do you know what this could do to us?" She sobbed. I closed my eyes. For years, that question would have broken me. Now it didn't. "You should have asked that before you did it," I said quietly. Dad came back on the line. "You're choosing money over family," he said bitterly. "No," I replied. "I'm choosing boundaries over exploitation." He scoffed. "You always were ungrateful. Ungrateful. For not wanting my future hijacked." I felt something cold and steady replace the last of my hesitation. "If you don't cooperate," I said, I will continue the fraud process. There it was. The line. Clear. Non-negotiable. The silence on the other end stretched. Then Mom whispered, "You wouldn't really do that." I answered without raising my voice. "I already am." Call ended abruptly. I set the phone down and stared at my hands. They weren't shaking anymore. That's when I knew this wasn't a reaction. It was a decision. The fallout didn't explode right away. It seeped, quietly, into every corner of my life. My parents stopped calling after that last conversation, but the silence felt loaded, like the pause before a storm. I knew they were talking about me. I could feel it in my bones. Family secrets had a way of vibrating through the air even when no one said them out loud. Finn texted first. Not to ask how I was. Not to ask what had happened. But to warn me. "They're telling people you're unstable," he wrote. "That you're stressed from work and blowing things out of proportion." I read the message twice. Unstable. That word landed harder than anything my parents had said. Because it wasn't new. It was the same story they'd always used when I stopped cooperating. I didn't reply. Instead, I saved the text. Screenshots had become a form of self-defense. A few hours later, my Aunt Linda called. Her voice was careful, measured. "I heard something concerning," she said. "About a car loan?" I closed my eyes. So the story had already started spreading. "Yes," I said. "They used my credit without asking." She inhaled sharply. "Oh, honey," she whispered. "They said you agreed." There it was. The rewrite. "No," I replied. "I didn't." Linda was quiet for a moment. Then she said something unexpected. "That doesn't sound right." Those words felt like oxygen. "I know," I said. "I have the paperwork." She sighed. "Your parents have always stretched the truth when it suited them." I thought about all the times I'd swallowed that truth to keep the peace. I wasn't doing that anymore. "They're scared," Linda continued. "Good," I said softly. She didn't argue. That alone told me a lot. At work, I started getting calls from unknown numbers. Voicemails with no message. Hang-ups. I blocked them all. Every unknown number felt like another attempt to pull me back into the chaos. That evening, I sat with Tasha at the kitchen table, paperwork spread out between us like a crime scene. "You're really doing this," she said. "Yes," I replied. She nodded slowly. "Good." I laughed weakly. "That's it. That's it," she said. "Because if they did this once, they'll do it again. And next time it might be worse." She wasn't wrong. Patterns don't stop on their own. They stop when they hit resistance. My phone buzzed again. A long text from Mom. I didn't open it right away. I waited until my hands were steady. Then I read it. "You're tearing this family apart. Your father can't sleep. People are asking questions. If you go through with this, don't expect things to ever be the same." I stared at the screen. She was right about one thing. Things would never be the same. And that was the point. Typed one sentence back. I didn't break this family. I stopped covering for it. I hit send. Then I blocked her number. My heart pounded as the confirmation popped up. Block contact. Yes. The silence that followed was immediate, heavy, and strangely peaceful. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for the next attack. I was in control of the distance. That night, I slept deeply. Not because everything was resolved, but because I had chosen myself clearly without apology. "In the dark," one thought repeated calmly in my mind. This is what boundaries feel like when they finally hold. Blocking my mom didn't end the noise, just changed its shape. The next wave came through people who had never mattered in moments like this before. cousins I barely spoke to, old family friends, even my grandmother's neighbor who somehow had my number. They all reached out with the same script. Concern wrapped in judgment. Your parents are worried about you. Family makes mistakes. You'll regret this one day. I stopped responding after the third message. Silence became my filter. If someone respected it, they stayed. If they didn't, they disappeared. That alone narrowed my world into something manageable. Meanwhile, the legal process kept moving. Forms filed. Calls returned. Emails sent. Each step felt strangely empowering. Not because I enjoyed it, but because I was no longer frozen. I was acting. One afternoon, the dealership finally called back. A different voice this time. A manager. More cautious. More formal. We've reviewed the paperwork, he said. There are some discrepancies. Discrepancies. A polite word for forged consent. I'd like copies of everything, I replied. You'll have them by end of day, he said. When the email arrived, my hands shook again. Signatures that looked like mine but weren't. Initials I never wrote. Dates I was never present for. Seeing it all in black and white made my stomach churn. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision repeated several times. I forwarded everything to the credit bureau and the legal aid clinic. Then I sat back and waited. Waiting used to terrify me. Now it felt deliberate. My dad tried to reach me through Ethan. A short message. He says you're going too far. I replied once. He went too far first. Ethan didn't respond. That evening I went for a long walk. No headphones. No distractions. Just the sound of my own footsteps and the city breathing around me. I realized something uncomfortable but freeing. If this ended with me completely cut off from my parents, I would survive. I had already been surviving emotionally for years. This was just honesty catching up. When I got home, there was another voicemail from an unknown number. I didn't listen. I deleted it. For once, I didn't need to hear their version of the story. I knew the truth. And more importantly, I trusted myself enough to stand by it. That night, I wrote down everything that had happened. Dates. Times. Exact phrases they used. Not for revenge. For clarity. So no one could gaslight me into forgetting. As I closed the notebook, a realization settled quietly. They weren't angry because I accused them. They were angry because I refused to absorb the consequences for them. And that changed everything. The shift came slowly, then all at once. First, nothing happened. No calls. No messages. No sudden apologies. Just absence. The kind that presses in on you and waits to see if you'll break first. I didn't. I kept going to work. Kept paying my bills. Kept living inside the boundaries I'd drawn. And somewhere along the way, I noticed something surprising. I wasn't falling apart. I was stabilizing. The legal aid clinic called with an update. They had reviewed the documents. They believed I had a strong case. Hearing that didn't make me happy. It made me steady. Like someone had finally confirmed I wasn't crazy. That I hadn't imagined the violation. My parents, meanwhile, started changing tactics. The anger softened into concern. The blame shifted into worry. A message came through from my dad's email address. Long. Carefully worded. We're worried about the stress this is causing you. Not about the debt. Not about the forged paperwork. About my reaction. I read it once. Then archived it. I didn't respond. That was the hardest part. Not defending myself. Not explaining. Not correcting the story. 'Cause silence felt like letting them win. But it wasn't. It was letting the truth stand on its own. dinner one night, Tasha looked at me across the table. "You're lighter," she said. I frowned. "What do you mean?" "You're not carrying them on your shoulders anymore," she replied. I thought about it. About how much of my identity had been shaped by reacting to them, by trying to anticipate disappointment, by staying small so things wouldn't explode. She was right. Without realizing it, I'd been setting myself down. The next update came from the credit bureau. The account was officially under investigation. Payments were paused. My score began to inch back up. It wasn't over, but it was moving forward. I took a deep breath I felt like I'd been holding for years. That night, I dreamed about driving. Not their car. Mine. An empty road. Windows down. No one telling me where to turn. I woke up smiling. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel hijacked. Felt possible. The next confrontation didn't come from my parents. Came from reality. A certified letter arrived in the mail, heavy and official, the kind you feel in your chest before you even open it. I sat at the table and read it slowly. The lender had acknowledged the dispute. The loan was flagged. They were requesting additional documentation. Proof. Timelines. Statements. Everything my parents assumed I would never push for. I scanned the pages and felt something shift again. This wasn't emotional warfare anymore. This was accountability. My dad called that evening from a new number. I recognized his cadence before I recognized the digits. I answered. "We need to talk," he said, voice lower than usual. "We already did," I replied. "Now lawyers are involved," he said. "Yes," I said. "That's what happens when paperwork matters more than promises." He exhaled sharply. "You're really going to let strangers decide this?" "You already did," I said. "When you signed my name without me." He tried to pivot. "We were under pressure," he said. "Life is hard," I replied. "Pressure doesn't turn theft into consent." Silence. Then a new tactic. "What if we refinance?" he asked. "In our own name." "When?" I asked. "Soon," he said. Soon. The word they used when they wanted time. Time I could no longer afford. "I need confirmation in writing," I said. "And I need it before anything else happens." He bristled. "You don't trust us." "I trust documents," I replied. The line went quiet. That night, I realized something painful and freeing. If they had fixed this immediately, I might have softened. But they didn't. They negotiated. They delayed. They treated my future like a bargaining chip. And that told me everything I needed to know. I sent one final email. Clear. Direct. Professional. All communication regarding the loan should be in writing. Any further attempts to pressure me will be documented. I didn't insult them. I didn't threaten. I simply stopped participating in the emotional version of the story. The next morning, my mom tried again. A message through a distant relative. "She's heartbroken," the message said. I deleted it without replying. Heartbreak didn't justify harm. At work, I got good news. A raise. Small. But real. Felt symbolic. My life moving forward while theirs stayed stuck in denial. I celebrated quietly. No announcements. No family group chat. Just dinner with people who respected my boundaries. That night, as I locked my apartment door, I realized I wasn't scared anymore. Not of losing them. Not of being blamed. Not of standing alone. Because I wasn't alone. I had myself. And for the first time, that felt like enough. The waiting period stretched into something that felt endless, not because nothing was happening, but because everything was happening quietly behind closed doors in offices and inboxes I couldn't see. Days blurred together. Every morning, I checked my email before I even got out of bed. Every afternoon, I flinched when my phone vibrated on my desk. I wasn't anxious anymore. I was alert. There's a difference. Anxiety feels chaotic. This felt strategic. Like standing guard over a future that had almost been stolen from me. My parents stayed silent during that time, and I knew exactly why. They were waiting me out. They had always believed that if they held their ground long enough, I would get tired, soften, and come back apologizing for being too much. That had been the pattern my entire life. I would notice something was wrong. They would deny it. I would push. They would minimize. And eventually, I would fold just to make the discomfort stop. But this time, folding wasn't an option. This wasn't about hurt feelings or awkward holidays. This was about my name, my identity, and the financial foundation of my adult life. I started to see the situation with unsettling clarity. The loan hadn't been flagged. If I hadn't checked my credit that morning, if I had trusted them just a little bit longer, I would have spent years paying for their decision. The years repairing damage I didn't cause. Years explaining to landlords, banks, and employers why my credit didn't reflect my behavior. That realization made my stomach turn. It also hardened my resolve. I spent those weeks rebuilding internally. Not just financially, but psychologically. I stopped framing the situation as something that had happened to me. I started framing it as something I had survived without surrendering. I organized every document into folders. Emails, call logs, screenshots, statements. Each file felt like a small anchor, grounding me in facts when emotions tried to creep back in. At night, memories surfaced that had nothing to do with money. Moments I had dismissed for years suddenly made sense in a new context. The time they opened credit cards in my name to help me build credit when I was barely 20. The way they always needed my information, my signatures, my cooperation, but never my consent. I saw the pattern clearly now. Access without accountability. Trust without transparency. Control disguised as family unity. One afternoon, an email arrived from the legal aid clinic. Short. Direct. They had reviewed everything. They believed the case was solid. Strong language. Clear violations. I reread the email 3 times. Not because I didn't understand it, because part of me still expected someone to tell me I was overreacting. That never came. Instead, I felt a wave of grief hit me so hard I had to sit down. Grief for the parents I thought I had. Grief for the version of myself who believed loyalty meant silence. Grief for all the times I had ignored my instincts to keep the peace. My dad broke the silence near the end of that waiting period. A single message. "We never thought you'd take it this far." I stared at the words for a long time. They weren't angry. They weren't sorry. They were shocked. Shocked that I had finally chosen myself over the role they assigned me. That message didn't make me doubt myself. Confirmed everything. They never expected resistance. They expected compliance. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't negotiating my worth. I was enforcing it. I poured that energy into my own stability. I cut unnecessary expenses. I worked extra hours. Not out of fear, but out of determination. Each responsible choice felt like reclaiming ground they had tried to occupy. I started sleeping better. Not perfectly, but deeply enough to dream again. And in those dreams, I wasn't explaining myself. I wasn't defending my decisions. I was just moving forward, unburdened. Slowly, the waiting stopped feeling like suspense. It started feeling like momentum. The email arrived on a Thursday, late enough in the afternoon that the office had gone quiet. No meetings left. No distractions. Just me, my desk, and the subject line I had been both waiting for and dreading. Final review outcome. I didn't open it right away. I stared at the screen, aware of my heartbeat in my ears, aware of how much weight that single click carried. This wasn't just about a loan anymore. It was about whether the world would finally see what I had been saying all along. I took a breath and opened the message. The words were formal, measured, almost cold, but they landed with the force of truth. To review, the account was deemed unauthorized. The responsibility was removed from my credit profile. The negative marks would be corrected. Further action would proceed against the parties responsible. I read it again, then again. Only on the third pass did it fully register. I was free. Not emotionally, not relationally, but financially, legally, unmistakably free. My hands started shaking, not from fear but from release. I pushed my chair back and stood up too fast, the room tilting slightly as adrenaline surged through my body. I went into the stairwell and cried, pressing my forehead against the cool concrete wall. No sobbing. No drama. Just quiet tears slipping down my face as years of tension loosened their grip. I wasn't crying because I had one. I was crying because I hadn't lost myself in the process. That night, my parents finally reached out together. A joint voicemail. Their voices side by side, carefully curated. My mom sounded fragile. My dad sounded controlled. They said they never intended to hurt me. They said things escalated too far. They said they wished we could go back. I listened once. Then I deleted it. 'Cause going back would have meant pretending nothing happened. And pretending had cost me too much already. They tried again the next day. Emails. Long paragraphs filled with regret-adjacent language. Not apologies. Explanations. Justifications. A subtle rewriting of events where intentions mattered more than impact. I didn't engage. I didn't correct them. I didn't argue. Silence wasn't punishment. It was clarity. At work, I noticed something unexpected. I was lighter. More present. I spoke up in meetings without second-guessing myself. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. It was as if removing that financial threat also removed an invisible leash I hadn't known was there. I went home that evening and cooked myself dinner. Nothing fancy. Pasta. A glass of wine. I sat at my table without my phone in my hand, without waiting for the next crisis. Quiet felt earned. I thought about all the times I had been told that family comes first. What no one had ever explained was that first often meant without question, without consent, without protection. I finally understood that choosing myself didn't mean I didn't value family. It meant I valued myself enough to stop being collateral damage. Before bed, I checked my credit report again. The numbers were shifting back into place. Not perfect yet, but healing. Like a bone that had been reset correctly at last. As I turned off the light, one thought stayed with me, calm and steady. They may never admit what they did. They may never fully understand what they took. But the system did. Truth did. And that was enough to let me move forward without looking back. The weeks after the decision felt strangely hollow at first. Not empty in a bad way. Empty like a room after heavy furniture has been moved out, leaving space you're not used to having. I kept waiting for the emotional crash everyone warned me about. The regret. The guilt. The urge to call and fix things. It never came. Instead, there was a slow, steady sense of distance settling in, like fog lifting from a landscape I was finally seeing clearly. My parents shifted into what I came to recognize as damage control mode. They didn't reach out directly anymore. They worked through intermediaries. Cousin. An old family friend. Someone always just checking in. The message was always the same, even if the words changed. They were hurt. They were confused. They didn't understand why I was being so extreme. I stopped responding to those too. because explaining myself to people who weren't affected was just another way of bleeding energy. Ethan tried once more. He showed up outside my apartment unannounced, leaning against his car like this was a casual visit and not a boundary violation. "You didn't have to go nuclear," he said, arms crossed. I looked at him for a long moment before answering. "I didn't go nuclear," I said. "I went legal." He scoffed. "You know Mom's barely sleeping." I nodded. "I know," I said. "She slept just fine when I was the one panicking about debt I didn't create." That shut him up. He didn't apologize. But he didn't argue either. That felt like progress of a different kind. After he left, I sat on my couch and noticed something important. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't replaying the conversation. I wasn't drafting imaginary responses in my head. I had said what I meant. And that was enough. Therapy became a place where I learned to reframe everything I had been taught. Dr. Lee helped me see how deeply money had been used as a leash in my family. Not just control over spending. Control over choices. Over timing. Over freedom. "Financial abuse doesn't always look like poverty," she said. "Sometimes it looks like access without permission." That sentence rewired something in me. I started setting firmer boundaries in places I hadn't even noticed before. At work. In friendships. In the way I talked to myself. I stopped justifying my decisions. I stopped over-explaining. I started trusting that my reasons were enough, even if no one else agreed with them. My parents' presence in my life shrank naturally after that. No dramatic cutoffs. No final confrontations. Just distance maintained by consistency. They invited me to things. I declined politely. They sent messages. I responded briefly or not at all. Eventually, the attempts slowed. Not because they understood, but because they realized the old pressure points no longer worked. And in that quiet, I began to build something new. A life that didn't revolve around proving my loyalty. A future that wasn't dependent on their approval. I made plans without factoring them in. Holidays with friends. Trips without explanations. Decisions made because I wanted them, not because they would keep the peace. The strangest part was how ordinary it all felt. No fireworks. No dramatic soundtrack. Just a steady sense of ownership over my own life. I realized then that freedom doesn't always arrive with celebration. Sometimes it arrives quietly, disguised as normalcy. And once you notice it, you never want to give it back. Looking back now, it's strange how small the moment was that changed everything. There was no screaming match. No slammed doors. No dramatic ultimatum delivered through tears. Just paperwork. Just facts. Just me finally refusing to carry what was never mine. For a long time, I thought the $40,000 car was the betrayal. The shiny proof of how easily my trust had been spent. But the car was only the surface. The real betrayal was the assumption underneath it. The belief that my name was a resource. That my credit was communal property. That my future could be leveraged without my knowledge because I would eventually understand. They didn't just take my credit. They took my sense of safety. They took my confidence. They took years of financial stability and gambled with it as if it were spare change. And when the consequences appeared, they didn't rush to protect me. They rushed to protect themselves. They blamed me for noticing. They blamed me for reacting. They blamed me for refusing to absorb the damage quietly. For a long time, that blame almost worked. There were nights I lay awake wondering if I really was too harsh, too cold, too unforgiving. Maybe family really was supposed to mean swallowing injustice for the sake of connection. But then I remembered the fear in my chest when I first saw the debt. The way my stomach dropped. The way my hands shook as I realized my life could have been derailed for years. And I understood something important. Love that requires self-destruction is not love. Family that demands silence at your expense is not safety. And forgiveness without accountability is just permission for it to happen again. My parents never truly apologized. They circled the truth. They softened the language. They reframed intentions. They wanted peace without responsibility. I stopped waiting for closure to be handed to me. I built it myself. I closed accounts. I secured my credit. I learned more about finances in 6 months than I had in the previous decade. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. And in doing so, I became someone they could no longer manipulate with confusion or guilt. The distance between us settled into something quiet and firm. We spoke rarely. When we did, it was surface level. Weather, work, neutral facts. They no longer had access to the parts of me that could be used against me. First, that felt sad. Then it felt peaceful. I began to notice how different my life felt without constant emotional negotiation. I made decisions faster. I trusted myself more. I slept better. I stopped bracing for impact every time my phone buzzed. I started imagining a future that didn't involve cleaning up someone else's mess. A future where my effort benefited me. Where my name was attached only to things I chose. Sometimes I still think about that car. How it probably still smells new. How they probably justified it as a necessity. How they likely tell the story as a misunderstanding where everyone was hurt. I don't correct it. I don't need to. Truth lives in my restored credit. In my steady savings. In the fact that I no longer fear the consequences of someone else's choices. They drove away in a car bought with my credit. I walked away with something they could never take. Clarity. Boundaries. And the certainty that my future belongs to me alone. I didn't destroy my family. I stopped financing their denial. And in doing so, I chose a life that no longer requires me to disappear so others can feel comfortable.